To hear Deputy Holly Cairns now, please.
Yesterday we had an extraordinary spectacle at the Finance Committee. One of the most senior and highest paid civil servants in the state engaged in an arrogant 2-hour dismissal of an independent expert report commissioned by his line minister. The Secretary-General of the Department of Health, Robert Watt, was clear. He rejects, quote, most of the findings of the report by Maura Quinn, the former Chief Executive of the Institute of Directors, into his botched handling of the secondment of Dr. Tony Holohan to Trinity College. This is despite the fact that the Health Minister says he accepts the findings of the report. It is also contrary to your own assertion, Taoiseach, that the report cannot be questioned, it's conclusive. So perhaps you can enlighten us, because it's still not clear on what basis Mr. Watt has rejected the findings of the report. They're not a matter of opinion. They are based on verifiable facts. They're not open to debate. Those facts are: Mr. Watt engaged in a solo run when Dr. Tony Holohan indicated he was considering stepping down as Chief Medical Officer and moving to academia. He committed 20 million of public money to this process without any government approvals or oversight. He failed to provide any rationale for the extent of the 20 million funding. He completely bypassed the Health Research Board and its rigorous and transparent protocols surrounding applications for funding in assigning this money. He failed to inform the Minister for Health about this process. He misrepresented the fact that he didn't inform the Secretary-General of the Department of Taoiseach of the detail of this proposal. He misrepresented the fact that your own Chief of Staff had been given any detail about this process. This is quite the litany, Taoiseach. Of course, he now tells us he rejects the finding of the government-approved report into this entire debacle. We know your own Chief of Staff, Deirdre Gallan, took a rather dim view of what Mr. Watt was misrepresenting in her own role in this shambles. In language that can only be described as damning, she said his assertions about her were grossly inaccurate and unwarranted and wholly without foundation. I can fully understand Ms Gallan's irritation at being dragged into this controversy by Mr. Watt, despite having zero involvement in it. Taoiseach, these are important questions for you and the government that are arising about this mess. It's not enough to say you accept the report when Mr. Watt, its central character, is loudly intimating he thinks it's a load of rubbish. So Taoiseach, I have 3 questions. Is it appropriate for Mr. Watt to reject the findings of this report? How can Mr. Watt's position be tenable? And do you or the government intend to take any action to make Mr. Watt accountable?
First of all, I want to thank the Deputy for raising this issue. I also want to thank Maura Quinn for her report, which I think is welcome, and to say that the government in its entirety accepts without reservation the recommendations of Maura Quinn in respect of this entire issue, and also in respect of the broader issue of secondment within the public service and within the civil service in particular. I think there are issues around the whole secondment policy area, and I think we need to be stronger in terms of identifying pathways for those who may, for example, have retired early as SecGens, for example, or in this case as a Chief Medical Officer, but who still have a lot of expertise. How does one deploy that expertise across the public service and the civil service in a more effective way than just merely secondments to a university? And by the way, a secondment to university can be beneficial. I think people overall, standing back from this, were acting in good faith insofar as the idea of developing a stronger capacity in research for public health. I've no issue with that. I think everybody also were conscious of the role that Tony Holohan had played as Chief Medical Officer in respect of the pandemic. But again, that doesn't in itself justify or in any way support the process here or what transpired here. And I think Maura Quinn is correct in terms of how, in this particular incident, it should have happened, and particularly in terms of individuals engaging in respect of their own situations with third parties. I mean, ultimately, we do need to capture the experience and expertise that people have garnered over the 2.5 years of COVID in respect of that. And what I said, and now in respect of the recommendations, they will be implemented by government. And the Secretary-General of the Department of Health is clear that they will be implemented by government and accepts the decision of government to accept all of the recommendations of the report itself. And in terms of the report was focused very much on doing this in a far more effective and better way and to learn lessons from it. That was the purpose of the report itself. And I think there's an obligation on everybody now to get down to it and make sure that proper procedures are in place into the future. And as someone with a lot of experience in research funding, I think we've come a long way in research, and clearly peer-reviewed, international-based research is the key way to do it. And in terms of, and again, my understanding is that was to be pursued, but that is, to me, very clearly the way that all research funding has to be deliberated upon. It has to be by peer review itself.
Respectfully, Taoiseach, you literally just talked around all of those questions for the entire time in the reply. I asked you, how can Mr Watt's position be tenable? Do you or the government intend to take any action to make Mr Watt accountable? And there's another aspect of this whole fiasco, I think, that is really deeply troubling. In April last year, Mr Watt refused to appear before the Finance Committee to discuss the matter. So the committee had to seek compellability powers from the Oireachtas to force Mr Watt to appear before it, which it ultimately received. And then the clerk of the committee had to write to Mr Watt asking if he would appear voluntarily, given that those powers were available to them. And it was only then that he agreed to appear before the committee. So, Taoiseach, senior civil servants refuse or have to be forced to appear before Oireachtas committees. Why should anybody else be willing to appear before a committee? And I'm just wondering, do you think that this kind of disdainful treatment of the Finance Committee, which is there to hold people to account on behalf of the public, sets a good example for other civil servants? A Civil Service Accountability Board chaired by the Taoiseach and on which you and the Minister of Public Expenditure sit is supposed to, as far as I know, hold secretaries and assistant secretaries to account. Wondering, when was the last time that this accountability board met, and will Mr Watt's conduct be reviewed by it?
Thank you,
and I will go back to my previous questions because you didn't answer them. Do you think the position is tenable? What are you doing to hold him to account?
Well, first of all, I did answer your questions in respect of the report. And in terms of the Secretary-General in the Department of Health, you know, and when I came into office as Taoiseach, the first 6 months we didn't have a permanent secretary at the Secretary-General of the Department of Health, which was, to put it mildly, in the context of COVID and other issues. Look, sorry, you have to allow me answer the question. I'm coming to the point. Sure, look, the point I'm saying to you is we do need, okay, stability has been brought to the Department of Health. The Secretary-General has, in terms of the administration of the Department of Health, been effective on a whole range of fronts. That has to be acknowledged. And that was required, both coming out of COVID, dealing with the consultants' contract, the slowing care implementations and so forth. That's my main, no, that's what I'm saying. That's why I believe it's important that the Secretary-General continues as Secretary-General of the Department of Health. On the bigger issues facing health, we need to now move to consistently improve, reform and implement the government programme in relation to health, and also the recommendations in terms of health itself. In terms of accountability before committees, my understanding is, and again, that he has appeared, the Secretary-General did appear in front of other committees in respect of this issue. But of course, Secretary-General should be accountable to the relevant Oireachtas committees in respect of issues that come under their administration or their specific department.
Deputy Breed-Smith, please. Deputy Breed-Smith, please. Please. Deputy Smith.
Yeah, Gormagut, Ceann Corla. Taoiseach, I was going to call you Taoiseach, it's very confusing around here, isn't it? Taoiseach, the news that Panda are hiking up their bin charges will be no surprise to customers who've had to pay hefty bin charges in this country since